All right, should we, maybe we'll get started? I think we can just jump in. So I'll stand up so you guys online can see us. So I'm Lee Roberts. I'm a research associate with City Futures, and I'm part of the team that organizes these events. But today we've asked Mike Harris to join us from Germany to introduce our two speakers. Mike does a lot of work with the HDR students, so I figured he'd be a good person to introduce our speakers today. So I'll hand over to Mike, who's eating breakfast.
Yeah, I'm just eating breakfast on the side here with a nice coffee. But look, thanks for asking me along to invite. To introduce the guests today. I've had the pleasure to hear presentations from both in their capacity as PhD candidates fairly recently. And both really interesting talks. They both our guests today happen to have backgrounds in practice and really kind of brought particular ideas and questions from their experience into their PhDs. And I find that really kind of shines through in their work and how they talk about their research. So the talks off, super interesting, really important and highly relevant, excuse me. So firstly, Sugandha, his title of her talk is Social Sustainability in the Indian Smart Cities Mission, Evaluating and Rating of the 100 Cities. So Sugandha's background is architecture and urban planning, with over a decade of professional experience and working on these projects. So master planning of several Indian smart cities, including GIFT, integrated manufacturing clusters, or IMCs, in 7 states, and also Bhopal Smart City. So Sugandha's research is really looking at the relevance of social sustainability within the often technology-based kind of concept of smart cities, and how social sustainability perspective stresses the interconnections between people and place. So look, as many of you know, there are kind of many ways to measure certain sustainability outcomes, but social sustainability is often, I'd probably say always, more challenging. So really important work, and that's what Sugandha will be discussing today. We also have Philip Grouse, whose title is Can Urban Design Improve Metropolitan Planning? An examination of the role of urban design in shaping and delivering the Western Parkland City. So Philip also has a background in urban planning and architecture, and a distinguished background in practice. I'd say is currently a design advisor to the Greater Cities Commission and a state government design champion. Also an adjunct professor at UTS. And formerly, informing his research at the moment, Philip was director Western City at the Greater Sydney Commission. So Philip's PhD topic is very explicitly generated by his personal experience of problems in the system, if I can, I'm paraphrasing here, if I can say that, but ask the question, why do good strategic plans in urban design often translate into poor physical places? So this is essentially an insider's deep dive into how the characteristics of the urban design process shapes the plan making process, as opposed to more non-spatial policy imperatives. So again, really important research. It kind of goes to the heart of planning and design process and what actually gets built. So welcome both. Thanks so much for taking the time to contribute to this forum, and looking forward to hearing more.
Thanks, Mike. So Philip's going to speak first, and then Sugandha will be joining us from online after Phil's talk.
And Lee, make sure you keep us to time. It's Friday afternoon, and I believe people go to the Roundhouse.
That's right. The highlight.
Good afternoon, everyone, and guten Morgen, Mike. Thanks for inviting me today, though I guess this might have been prompted by Mike, as I understand, so thank you for that. As I said, I started life as an architect, and I worked in Cox Architects with a very well-known planner called Bob Meyer, and I think Glenn Searle's on this thing. He will know Bob well. Bob said he infected me with planning, and he convinced me that planning was big architecture and far more exciting than architecture. From that, they kind of joined together, and I got very interested in urban design, especially how they work together to improve physical outcomes. And it's something that I've struggled in practice and academically with. I'd also like to acknowledge Simon Pinniger and Rob Freestone, who are my supervisors, though any shortcomings are obviously mine, not theirs, as they say. I don't need to read out the topic again. So why I'm doing the thesis, and it's really about unintended consequences. I think that's what it comes down to, and there's a lot written by Marcus Spiller, a whole lot of people. But what I'm really interested in getting to what's actually going on and what insights can you gain by really looking at this through a case study in which I guess I've been involved in. So that prompts the questions. And as we say, it's translation. It's one of translation partly. And if you look at the two little pictures here, when you look at a lot of metropolitan plans, they look fine. You see centres, connections, rail lines. You go and visit the place and there hasn't been the urban design consideration. And while all these good things like transport are planned, look at this picture of Parramatta, the bus route cutting the town in half and making it almost impossible to fix. So starting with the literature review, I think the mismatch between planning visions and outcomes is quite common. I think the role of urban design and what it is very unclear. And the interface, which is the interaction between planning and urban design, is weak. And I think the drivers that we call beyond planning, economics and all those sorts of things, the influence is getting stronger. And then I think from what I've been working through, and I'm just in my beginning of my second year, I think there's a series of gaps in the research that are starting to come through, and they're quite initial, and hopefully some discussion on that today would be very helpful. I'm just going to start with a little bit of history. If you have Rob Freestone as a supervisor, you can't help but do that. And I think planning and urban design is one of those things where you have to look at what's happened previously. So the pictures I've got up here were Sydney's first metropolitan plan, and it was in 1948, just after the war, and it was structured around an overarching spatial idea. It also included a thorough physical analysis of the place, topography, water systems, etc. It also reflected thinking at a series of scales. And if you look at the images here, you really see that eastern Sydney on the harbour was urban. It was a city. There was a green belt dividing the two, and then to the west was the agriculture and the food bowl for Sydney. It had been inspired by models. The London plan also had a green belt after the war. The plan, though, was defeated by growth. And that's been a story of Sydney and many cities around the world, urbanisation and growth. They are very powerful beyond planning drivers. In my thesis, I'm calling them supra-planning because they're above and beyond. They're beyond non-spatial drivers. So I meant it in quite a specific way. The city has continued to spread westward away from amenity, from jobs, temperatures, good temperatures, and we've ended up with a city and a periphery rather than this contained city with a green belt, etc. I'm going to jump forward now 70 years, which is our entire planning history in Australia, 70 years. Again, there's an overarching idea, and the idea here, rather than one of just containment, is to rebalance the city. And so I think there's a vision that has a very strong equity to it, whether it's translated or not, another question. But I think it's moved from trickle down from east to west to a rebalancing of three equal cities. And each of them contain what we now think are jobs of the future. So we've got technology, finance in the east, health research in the middle at Westmead, and then aerospace around the airport. And then each one also has either a harbour, a river, or a parkland. So amenity, place, and these jobs combined together. If we go to the next slide, we then go down to the Parkland City, which is really the Western City. And there's a number of elements here that I think are really interesting, and they are contested. I was going to mention there's been a recent article, but we may as well say who it's by. It was Glenn Searle, and it caused quite a fuss in the papers recently, questioning the Western Parkland City. And maybe Glenn can clarify this when he asks his questions. But I think there's a question raised, why do this now? Why not get Parramatta going? Why not connect to Parramatta? And in some ways, this goes to the heart of the study. When we look at the beyond planning drivers, and if we just go to the slide, I'll start with the urban form and vision. So as we say, we're talking about giving physical design direction, and the region plan at the highest levels talks about this city being defined by Wienermatta, South Creek, central element of the urban design and water management of the city, delivering a cool and green parkland city. So the vision talks about the sort of physical outcome it wants. And why do this now? Well, I think there's a question of governance, politics and governance. So there is a novel governance. There's a three-level agreement between federal, state, local governments. There's also an agreement between 8 councils, most of whom have been absolutely opposed to the airport for many, many years, till Bob Meyer and others helped turn it around. There's funding of the airport, there's funding of rail, and there's the Aerotropolis Centre. The rail delivers in the areas of the 8 councils. Should it have gone east-west before north-south? One can debate. Then in a sense, all these things have come together now at this point in time. One could wait, and it most likely will never happen again. So this question of money, politics and design, which is the sort of 3 parts, when it coalesces, is that time to do something? Is that a good idea? I will leave to others to discuss, but I think it's just part of how this thing works. The conceptual framework looks at relationships between, so planning, urban design, and what I'm calling the super planning drivers are these elements. It's really hard drawing a diagram. Being an architect, diagrams are harder than actually doing all the working drawings of a building, because it tries to speak to things that perhaps aren't spatial. There's a reasonable amount of research on each of the elements. There's research on some of the relationships, planning, urban design, etc. I think there's a real gap between planning, urban design and the drivers together, and how urban design acts at the nexus of all 3. And I think the diagram is deficient in drawing the drivers as another element. You could think that, another way I think about it is that the drivers are like the universe and the other things are like the planets. The universe is all around us and the elements are so intertwined, they need to be pulled out for analysis, but economics, social, environmental, all interact with each other in quite a complicated way, and Brenner has described that very well, which I'll speak to in a minute. So really, I think from doing the research and the literature, that nexus is probably one of the really important gaps. I'm going to spend a minute or 2 on the objectives, so you have to bear with me. But I think they're important because together they're framing the narrative of what I'm doing, they're structuring the research, and in a way they've come out of the literature review. I started with a simple question, but I think getting the objectives right is really important. So the first one is about the role of urban design. There are a million definitions of urban design, and getting bogged down into that has not proved fruitful. But I think what Jonathan Barnett, who started the first urban design course at Harvard, what he says is very helpful. He calls it the process of giving physical design direction to urban growth, conservation and change. That means it doesn't have to, regional plans do not have to draw everything, but they have to give sufficient physical design direction to understand what the outcomes might be. And the other thing is he talks about giving direction to growth. That first 1948 plan I showed didn't give physical design direction to growth. Growth killed it. And growth and urbanisation have just been things that have pulled plans apart over time. I'll try and just show you a diagram of what I'm trying to talk about. So giving physical design direction, when we look at the plan on the left, It shows Wienermatta Creek, which is the blue line. It's 60 kilometres long. It's an enormous catchment. So there's the next level of spatial representation. But in the region plan is also the diagram on the right. And that they are actually called urban design principles, and they talk to how you apply it to the place. These aren't any particular places, but they're typologies. A neighbourhood, a city centre, and it's saying redirect development to amenity and walk to transport. That's a very powerful idea. Rather than starting with the transport engineers doing our grids at 1 kilometre or whatever, start with the creek and then put the transport 2 or 3 blocks back, use topography, which means you're place specific, and the transport then starts to work with the environment systems. They start to come together and you actually make it human-centred. You live in amenity and walk to transport. What we're doing generally is living on Parramatta Road, Canterbury Road, we're living on transport away from amenity. So that is a very powerful change in thinking. Does this give sufficient physical design direction? I think is an interesting question and worth looking at. The second objective, which Mike Harris quizzed me about in the panel, and is it too similar to the first one or not? And I've been doing a lot of thinking, and the question was, is this one more about governance? And I'm arguing that this is separate because this is looking at the interface between planning and design, which interface means interaction. How do they interact together? And working through the literature, they interact and they are enabled by design governance. The interaction without governance actually is not possible. When we were part of the Western Sydney Planning Partnership, all the agencies were all in one room. We were in a studio together. Without the city deal, couldn't have done that. And again, Barnett is helpful. He makes a distinction between plain governance, design governance. Design governance is cognizant of the urban design outcome of decisions along the process. And in his view, bad outcomes are where we have governance processes where urban design is not thought about and the consequences are always unintended, like the Parramatta example. There is a lack of literature on how design governance works. There's discussions about it. How it works as part of the interaction is really central to my study. So I've tied these two together and I'll be very interested in Mike's comments. It's only breakfast time. He's got all day to think about it, which is good. When we look at trying to explain what this is like, I've just put these two slides up, which is design interface. And this is from the Western Parkland Authority, which again is a new authority for the Western Parkland City. And just these two blueprint plans, we've been calling them, bring infrastructures together at micro, macro scale, but we see all the green infrastructure, the transport infrastructure being brought together in the one set of drawings by the same group of people working with the agency. So that's what I'm calling a design interface. And there is then a governance process, again coming from a novel governance framework. And here you'll see hierarchy of plans, many of them by the same organisation, working backwards and forwards iteratively. They're not just finished and you move on to the next. A lot of them, the DCP, the master plan, the precinct plan, the Aerotrophs road area plan, were prepared at the same time, working backwards and forwards, understanding what would need to be done at each stage. The third objective is looking at all these drivers beyond planning and urban design called Supra. And Brenner here talks about a framework of interscalar relationships, economic, institutional, etc., encompassing many scales. All these things are interacting at different scales. Things like economics end up being very spatial. They'll concentrate knowledge workers, etc., etc. They all have an impact, and how then they relate to urban design is part of, I guess, trying to put this thing together. And the other thing is planning and urban design also influence the drivers. act the other way. So there is that's why it's a nexus between those three parts. I've just put this slide up here because it raises a point, and I think that increasingly the drivers beyond planning are global and they change much more quickly than they used to. Saskia Sassen popularised the term global city in 2001. She identified attributes of global cities. Big companies moved to the city, that the back of house went to the periphery, etc., etc. And I think still today in the work I'm seeing in government, looking at innovation districts, they're doing the same thing. Here's an attribute, blah, blah, blah. Only 5 years later, Sir Peter Hall, in his research, found it was actually flows between things rather than static attributes of places that were important. That's really fundamental, because if we're looking at Tech Central or something, which is one of the things I'm advising on at the moment, we can say the universities near here, RPA hospitals there. Who's looking at not the physical flows of active transport, walking? Where are the data flows? Where's research actually moving? If we don't actually look at these other things, are we looking at the right picture? Is planning understanding this change? So these sorts of drivers, and that's where technology, economics and all these things come together. Will this change planning to become more relational, etc.? A quite big question. And these drivers, I don't think by a lot of planners and especially urban designers, are really understood. So the last objective is quite a difficult one, because this is how do we look at the nexus? And when you look at the literature, it's not that helpful, because it says not much literature has focused on the process of urban designer's relationship to final outcome. So how we bring this together, I think, is going to be critical, and it really relies on the first three objectives and taking that through this case study over this next period. But I think I'm running out of time, so I'll be very quick here. So the findings I'm hoping to uncover are insights rather than judgments whether plans are good or not. It's that mismatch between the processes, the gaps in the interface, the gaps in design governance, and then looking at Parkland City, can this be generalised? Because it is quite a specialised novel, governance and all the rest of it. So that we can translate planning visions more successfully into outcomes. I think also recognising what the role of urban design plays in metropolitan planning. It's been trivialised to great places. It's the big government sort of thing you hear everywhere, which is really the micro level, and the micro level doesn't work without the macro, which is what this is showing. And I'll just finish on the last slide.
The cursor's not on the PowerPoint. Just click in there.
Okay. So as an architect, I can't resist doing a drawing. So I think the situation at the moment with these issues, I've called business as usual, where we have hierarchical processes, top-down planning, bottom-up urban design, and they're isolated from each other, and it's very temporal. It starts where planning is very significant, urban design is very minor, not taken into account, and by the time urban design becomes important in the process, the planning is finished, it's too late. So that there is the hierarchical question, there's the gap between them, and also these drivers then act on them individually, not in a holistic way. So the hypothesis is if we bring the interface together, which is integration, that we work up and down iteratively, so we need a process that does that. We then get the interface addressed, and then they address the non-spatial drivers in unison together. How this and the drivers work in this diagram, I don't think really works, because as I've said, it's more like the universe, and I haven't figured out how to do that yet, but that is where I'm up to at the moment. So thank you very much.
So we thought we'd do the two presentations first and then do sort of a shared Q&A at the end, if that makes sense. So we will switch over to Sugandha's presentation. Let's see, I don't know where we should close the other.
So shall I share my screen?
Yes, yeah.
Sure.
Visible?
Yep.
Yep.
All right. So, okay, is it visible on some other screen? Because the one that I see on CFRC Seminar Series 2020, like, the recording thing, that's something different. Anyways, if you can see it, good now. So hello, everyone. And I would like to quickly extend my thanks to CFRC and Mike for this opportunity. And in this seminar series, I'm presenting a part of my PhD research on smart cities and social sustainability. This particular presentation is about evaluation and ranking of the 100 smart cities based on social sustainability criteria that is developed for the purpose. So these are the contents for this presentation. Quick talk about the research problem, where it all started from, as Mike also talked about it, and introduction to the study, the 100 Smart Cities mission, objectives, and then I have divided the study into two parts, the factors of urban social sustainability in Indian context, and then the evaluation and rating. So we would talk about both of them and then conclude the study. As I mentioned, before I move on to the particular insights into the study, I would just quickly like to introduce its context. Before starting this academic project, I had an opportunity to work on some of the initial smart city projects in India, in which I really questioned the social impacts of such developments. And these questions were also fueled by the readings that you just, the glimpses are on the screen right now. And they raised concerns like how smart cities are really addressing the Indian urbanization. What is happening to the urban poor and the informal sector, which are the really heart of the cities in India? So what can make Indian smart cities actually smart? Is it citizens? Is it infrastructure? Or is it the quality of living? So with these questions in mind, and these concerns were also supported by certain literature, which finally formed the background of this study. That includes, if I just quickly read through them partially, that understanding the technical side of being smart, the issues related to people and communities have been relatively neglected, or the evidence of social content in smart cities is limited. In Indian context, one of the authors has said that unless technological innovations are aligned with social innovations, India's urban chaos will not improve much through smart cities mission. With all of that background, try to really understand these major topics, like the what smart city concept, as I understand, is emerging as an attractive label to address these pressing issues of global urbanization, and they all say that they attain sustainable development. And if we look at sustainability, it's much rigorously used terminology. And at the same time, whenever you look at it mostly from green environmental lenses. However, any change in built environment has an implication on social environment. So to understand this term social sustainability, as I now just call it, as a dynamic concept that really combines the design of physical realm with the design of social world. So looking at that, this global shift that we can see in urban planning towards the smart cities, it is good if you look at it from a perspective of technology, because now you are able to really integrate the physical design with digital master planning. But somewhere there's a risk that we are relegating social sustainability to an afterthought. So that's how this whole study really was based on. And so here the focus of this presentation is to discuss social sustainability in Indian smart cities mission through analysis of 100 smart cities. To give you an understanding of smart cities mission, this particular slide, quite a lot of words around it, but it majorly discusses the conception of smart cities in India. So if broadly, if I talk about it, then till 2011 and 12, urban reforms like GNNURM in India were more linked to building new infrastructure. It was in 2013 that the creation of 100 smart cities was announced. However, it was changed to conversion of existing cities into smart cities later, as the whole program started to move or further conceptualized on paper. Initially, it was meant to inject or improve the transportation and have some ICT components. But later, the whole program was developed in a way that in each city, there'll be two components. One, an area-based development, which would be like more of, retrofitting or redevelopment or greenfield development, or the second part would be a smart solution at pan-city level. So this is how the whole idea was conceived later. And to achieve it, there were just two rounds of challenges that happened. So the first round was to select the 100 cities. It was a round where the cities were selected based on their urban population and number of statutory towns. And mostly all the, a balanced approach was taken to really choose these cities to participate in the second round of competition, where for second round, best consultants were selected and impaneled, and they helped or they supported the municipal corporations to build their smart city visions and submit a proposal that was assessed, and later 100 cities were selected as part of Smart Cities mission. Now here the government decided to invest 1,000 crore in each of the city over a span of 5 years. This mission is about to end in June 2023, after which no disbursements will be made to any cities for any project under this program. So this was just a glimpse of it. Now talking about this study. So this study has a wider objective and analysis has been done at different levels. Starting with the 100 cities, then 40 cities, and then 2 strategically selected cities. So here, in this particular presentation, we are only going to talk about the first part, the analysis of 100 smart city proposals that really illustrate the vision and strategy of the different cities in their context. And that's how it was important to see how each city is looking at social contents in their proposals. While doing this study, there were 2 major gaps that those were found. So the first gap was there is a lack of methodology to assess social sustainability. And the second gap was the lack of appropriate criteria and framework to evaluate smart city policy intent and implementation. And therefore, before measuring the social sustainability of the smart cities, what has been really done is the first objective here, as it says, is to identify the critical factors that affect social sustainability in Indian cities, because these things are very contextual in nature. So it was very important to see what affects Indian cities. And then the second part is about evaluation and rating of the 100 smart cities based on their social contents. The next 5 slides that you'll see here would be addressing the first objective. So here on this particular slide, it identifies 4 widely accepted evidence-based themes of social sustainability, which are social capital, social infrastructure, social equity and inclusion, and collaborative planning. After which, again, through the literature review, there were certain factors in built environment which are listed here. Those were found that affect these themes. So I call them theme-based factors or thematic factors. As the study is about India, as I mentioned earlier also, it's very important to list the challenges that Indian cities are facing. So I tried to look at what urban challenges Indian cities are facing in today's context, and that can be added to the factors that I initially identified in general literature, which was in the previous slides. So here, the important ones were organizing the informal sector, facilities for deprived, in situ slum redevelopment, mixed land use, affordable housing schemes, and budget allocation for collaboration, which were added to the list. Now, before finalizing the social factors to assess these proposals, it was very important to understand the structure in which these cities, they submitted these proposals. So here what you see are, okay, before that, there were 5 sections in the smart city proposals, out of which 3 were scored. And the 3 that you see here are the ones which are scored. The other 2 are implementation plan and financial plan, because they were not scored and they're not directly related, so I haven't put them here. Out of these 3 also, because the Pan City proposal was very much technological interest-based development, it is not considered for this particular assessment of social content. So what you see here is the city profile, which is 30% score. It includes city vision, goals, citizen engagement, and area-based proposal, where it includes approach, methodology, key components, smart urban forms, convergence agendas and implementations. Convergence here, what I mean is merging the urban programs. There were certain programs in Indian cities which were already existing, but they were kind of brought together under the Smart City Mission flag, and they are called as convergence programs. So this is the major structure, and how I have looked at it is I've put the city profile, or rather I would say the city vision and goals, under a policy, and approach methodology towards area-based development, I've put it under strategy or implementation-based ideology. Now, another question that arises is why analyze these proposals? So why am I doing it is because they define the smart city concept for each individual context. Each municipality has given it a thought, talked to people, and put it together as what they want, or how do they look at a smart city, and how do they want to develop their city in the near future. These proposals, they elaborate on the social dimension of the plan. It's this only initially where I get to know what and how socially these cities want to progress. And then these proposals, they determine social dimensions that are included, excluded, or prioritized in each of these proposals by individual cities. So that is the reason I analyze these smart city proposals. So now, trying to sum up all of these urban social themes and factors which we discussed in the last few slides. This particular slide indicates the importance of place-based planning approach towards smart cities for optimal social impact. So here I'm trying to put all of these factors together. So the first one is what I understood from the social sustainability literature, where there are 4 themes and 14 factors that I identified. Later added, the next layer is the literature on urban challenges in India, where 6 new factors came into picture. The third layer is about the structure of smart city proposals under Smart City Mission, where 2 more new themes and 1 factor was emerged. And if I put all of that together, in social sustainability in Indian context can be assessed through 6 themes and 21 factors for smart cities. This is how I have just structured all these factors and themes for the assessment. So what you see here in a little darker shade have emerged through urban challenges of Indian cities and the structure of 100 smart cities, and rest were part of the initial literature, social sustainability literature that I worked on. Coming to the analysis of the 100 smart city proposals, these are the quick general observations. Like it's about like the 100 cities. These are the quick things that I kind of observed when I was doing a manual scanning of all these 100 proposals. So as the smart city proposals, initially selected were 20 cities, and rest of them really came later, and the initial 20 proposals were very much available online. One can see much repetition in the subsequent submissions. The consultants who were writing other 80 proposals took many references and benchmarks from the previously done work. The cities have mostly referred to connectivity only for the last mile connectivity. Like, you're starting your trip and ending of the trip. So like individual trip starting and the beginning. Beginning and ending. Security has been mostly talked about in terms of only CCTV cameras. Identity is talked majorly by the cities which are discussing tourism strategies or projecting themselves as the tourist area. Accessibility is only talked about in terms of old age children, physically challenged groups of the society, and citizen participation was mostly referred to provision of grievance redressal system and e-governance. So it was much restricted in their approach, and most of these, as I also talked about it earlier, there was this convergence of project scheme. So most of these smart city projects on the issues that were identified in Indian cities as urban challenges, like affordable housing, slum rehabilitation, street vendor improvements, they were part of the convergence scheme of smart city mission, which were not directly dealt under the ABD. ABD, I mean to say the area-based development that we discussed just earlier as the part or rather a section within these proposals. So there were certain drawbacks in it, and area-based development models were majorly developed in three major ways, like redevelopment, retrofitting, and greenfield. And there were the combinations were also accepted. So if you see here, these are the 5 different ways in which the cities have proposed to develop their recognized area, recognized area for development. So 88 cities opted for either the retrofit model or a combination of retrofit and development. Like if you look at these numbers here. So, but when I kind of looked at how much component is the redevelopment out of this, it is not even 50%. So majorly the most of the land under area-based development is going under retrofitting model. And retrofitting model has its own limitations. It doesn't give you like, a free hand. It is a restricted way of, within a certain area or in a certain way you need to do things. Due to this, one can see that most of the projects are repetitive in many proposals. For instance, there are 37 cities who emphasized on the strengthening of tourism by architectural restoration, conservation, and improving physical and social condition of the city for the tourism. I guess I'm a little late. Anyways, so considering the way the smart city proposals were drafted, if you see here, the 100 cities are assessed under 2 heads, policy and strategy. And the ordinal ranking shows that Bhubaneswar, which you see here, has the highest or the best of the rating possible. This graph shows here that the 2 cities that have promoted social content are part of phase 1 selection, which is evident here as the orange color, which is just 2 cities here. Rest of them lie much lower in their ratings. So if you look at the next slide, it is only in the higher ratings you only see these 2 cities, and most of the others are lying in this section. So I think the cities have not optimally addressed social sustainability as part of their smart city rubric. This particular slide, it actually plots the smart policy and strategies of these 100 smart city proposals. And if you look at these bubbles that are, like say, for example, this is Bhubaneswar, the bigger bubbles and away from the x-axis, or say higher on the y-axis, are where the cities have done good in both their strategies and their policies. However, most of the city lie much down here, which kind of suggests that there's quite a lack of social content in their approach, mostly in terms of strategies. With these ratings, I've divided the cities into 3 major typologies. The first one is the progressive cities, which shows that there are superior performances, whereas I discussed there are just 2 of them. They even have budgetary allocation for continuous citizen participation. This one, the emerging cities, which are 37 cities in number, they kind of show a satisfactory level of social structure, and they have started to recognize the need of social audits. But again, I guess a lot of it to be done in terms of citizen participation and stuff. So that is where more knowledge needs to be extended to these cities. Nascent cities, which are 61 cities in number, they really fail to address the social sustainability in their proposals. And 68% of them really looked at improving their revenues and economy through tourism activities, where they looked at the tourist section, but somewhere fall short of reaching out to the citizens. Quickly talking about the limitations of the smart city proposal assessment approach. One of them is that it does not include any project that is going outside the smart city mission package. I mean, we do not have a systematic data where we could do that kind of assessment. The choice of area, which was chosen under the area-based development, changes the importance of certain social factors in the city. So we understand that, but obviously that was not possible to be made part of the assessment. And to conclude this part of the study, I would say that this is a novel attempt to really relate smart city policy goals and operationalization of social sustainability. This particular review really highlights what are the factors that need to be looked in Indian context for the betterment of the cities, or for the development of cities, which is more holistic in nature. That includes looking at urban informality, social exclusion, uneven growth, poor land management, and lack of participative governance. And these elements have been really used to expand the social sustainability factors to assess Indian context. And based on the typology analysis, the research recognizes the necessity of place-based approach to improve the current smart city strategy in Indian context. I rest my work here, and if there are any questions, they're most welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Sugandha. Echo, where that's coming from, but maybe, yeah, that's a good point. Sugandha, can you mute yourself for now?
Pardon?
That's okay. I think you're all right. Do you want to bring up the chat? And
yeah, that's
okay.
so Lisa.
Glenn Sell has his hand up.
Yeah, Glenn, do you want to go ahead and ask your question while we're...
There was a question for Philip, actually, not to Sugandha. So if Phil's still there.
I'm there, I'm here.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just moved back, otherwise all you do is see the back of my head on that picture. Sure. Go.
Yeah, look, I think you're right in saying that there's an opportunity, the opportunity for the creation of the Western Parkland City came from the tri-level of governance that was enabled by the city deal, but that only created the possibility, I think, of the Western Parkland City being a third city. The other thing that it required was the exclusion of Parramatta from that city deal, because if Parramatta had been included, you could have still had tripartite governance, but then just focusing on Parramatta as the way to get Western Sydney going, and with a good connection to the airport, so the employment benefits of the airport could then have been shared with Parramatta. And for all the sorts of reasons I outlined in my paper, it would have led to better workforce access options as well. So what I'm saying is that the tri-level governance thing certainly created the possibility of the Western Parkland City, but that also required the extra kind of exclusion of Parramatta itself.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Ben. And perhaps I'm going to do a whole series of interviews with all the actors involved. So I think asking that question about Parramatta's, that's a really good point.
Good. Are there other questions online? Anybody else? If you raise your hand or drop something in the chat. Oops, James, you're muted. There you go.
Yes, sorry. Yes, I have my hand up. Thanks very much for both of those really stimulating presentations. It's just terrific to see the standard and the range of high degree work underway. But my questions are, of course, all to do with the Parkland City and Philip's presentation. So, Philip, it's just great that you're doing this. Of course, you'll have to take a critical approach to it rather than the embedded approach of a practitioner. Look, there's a huge amount of topics in this, and perhaps there's a whole discussion that needs to be undertaken in terms of your research questions and your research method, which I won't go into here. But just talking about the content of what's at stake. Yeah, you're right, of course, that the Cumberland County Plan was sort of overwhelmed by the growth that took place after World War II. But to say that it was defeated by growth is a little bit simplistic, because it could have accommodated that growth if they had stuck to a sort of satellite city model that was the original idea. And of course, so the fundamental problem that we have is the ownership of land, and the fact that we have no orderly process in Australia to convert rural land to urban land without and the issues that then presents politically and in terms of the economics of the whole thing. So everything sort of came unstuck because of the immense pressure that was put on the Greenbelt concept by vested interests. And those vested interests are still out there in Western Sydney. They were beautifully analysed by Daly years ago in Sydney Boom, Sydney Bust. But the operation of property speculators and so forth on the periphery of Sydney is a pretty shocking story. And you can't come to grips with what's happening there today unless you look at the actual property boundaries and see how impossible many of the urban design proposals that are put forward by the consultants are in relationship to those parcels of land and who owns them. So that's one very important consideration for the bringing together urban design and planning. Did you hear all that?
Yes, I did. Thank you. No, I think you're right. It's simplistic to talk about growth in a vacuum. And I think both us and the US, where there is enough growth and demand and landowners, that's sort of a combination of value uplift. And it's a great challenge in the Western Parkland City and elsewhere, because the highest value is usually residential or something else. And low density is obviously cheaper to develop. And I think you're right, all those different combinations together have created all of that spread. And I remember Sue Holliday saying, when she was Director General of Planning, when they did the Compact City, they had basically people and developers and landowners at the door drumming, saying, release land, release land. It's been terribly powerful. I think you're absolutely right. I think the question of how to be objective about something one is working has been embedded on, and I think Mike Harris made the point, there's advantages and disadvantages. The literature I've seen that talks about active research, I think the term is, how to triangulate to get a diversity of views, how to have interviews that aren't leading questions to get that more diverse view. And that sort of part of the methodology I think needs to be developed further. And I think the other thing is to not judge the case study, but to try and unpack it to reveal insights, but not just my insights. I think that's got to be.
No, well, that's a whole other point, of course. That is, what is the nature of a case study, and what can you generalize from a particular case? So that's a whole body of research literature on that challenge. So good luck with that. I mean, these arrangements, for example, that Glenn Searle just mentioned, these intergovernmental relationships are indeed unique, and so therefore it's and they're they are in their early days. So just the extent to which this particular circumstance around the big involvement of the federal government because of the airport is the extent to which that would be applied to any other metropolitan situation in Australia, much less overseas, I think is a very important point. So it's a very specific study.
Thank you, James. Claire, you have a question?
I have a question for Suganda. This is Claire Daniel in the City Futures Research Centre, physically. I'm interested in the idea, I guess, because I'm also researching urban planning and technology. And I find a similar kind of pattern where the social and the community issues get left off. And it's almost self-evident and an obvious finding. And I was just wondering your thoughts on how we make our research something more than just pointing out yet again that the community has been ignored in planning. Or how do we link it to that higher problem? I'm not sure. It's quite a big question.
Yeah, definitely it is. Actually, what I have tried to do is what I discussed here was just one initial part. And then I have conducted some questionnaire surveys and I have talked to people about it. And I've even moved, I've even had a word with the citizens, see how they want their voice to be heard, or probably how do they look at how Indian Smart Cities mission has really been able to accommodate it within. So that is one aspect of it. But if I say what my research, I've got to understand few little things. Like one is about social audits, and that really helps you to reach out to people at different stages of the work, where you get to understand how do they look at your work that's been on ground or being conceived. So that is one great aspect. And then another thing, it is to really look at how this whole, how every project or every program can really support continuous engagement of community and citizens. So for that also, there's an interesting element that came up, is that you need to have some kind of probably budgetary allocations where you, it's just not about showing it, but but that kind of gives financial support to the people who are really implementing or conceiving the projects to reach out to people and engage them. I think that's the first step where I see that it start to happening. In India, it is a very, it's a seedling right now. I mean, I would say participation, collaborative planning, citizen participation, community work. These are in their nascent stage, and its Smart City mission has given it the first, I would say, people have started to hear about it. So that's the first step. And later, I guess these audits or probably the budgetary helps and stuff like that would really would really take it to the next level. Further, I mean, probably I would not be, as you rightly said, it's such a broader thing to talk about that I may not be able to really pinpoint one aspect, but these are the two things that I thought really would help to take community participation to the next level.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I think we could talk. I've got a list of questions in my head but I think given that it's 5:02, we'll stop there and ask questions in some other forum some other time. But thanks very much to Philip and Sugandha for speaking today. I think Mike had to jump off to another meeting, so but thanks to him as well for a great introduction. And we will have our next seminar in about 2 weeks. So please look out in your email or LinkedIn or wherever you heard about this one, and look out for the next session. So thanks very much for coming. Thanks to everybody online, and see you all in a few weeks.